Hermit lived isolated from society for 27 years before a mistake ended it all. Ever wanted to get away from it all? So did Christopher Knight. But he didn't settle for a week off from work. Instead, he lived away from society for months, then years. Before he knew it, he'd been alone for nearly 3 decades. But one day, a fateful misstep would send everything spiraling out of control.
Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos.
What made a man want to give everything up? Christopher had a relatively normal upbringing in Maine, and there seemed little he needed to get away from. But there may have been hints he'd end up this way. You see, Christopher had always had a hard time relating to other people, even his peers. He preferred his own company to spending time with others. Still, he was smart, and his future looked promising. So, what on earth changed? Well, in 1986, and just as his life was supposedly coming together, Christopher ran away from everything he knew. He didn't even tell his family or work what he was doing. In fact, with no map or compass, not even he knew where he was going. It was the start of a bizarre journey. After driving in no particular direction, Christopher ditched his green Subaru and left the keys in the ignition. Then, armed with a tent and backpack, he began his trek into the unknown. There was just one problem. He had zero experience living in the wilderness. Somehow, he had to figure out a way to survive. Christopher spent his first 2 weeks simply traversing the Maine forests. But he soon realized how ill-prepared he'd been, especially in terms of getting food. He had no weapons for hunting, and he was forced to eat berries, which were harder to find than expected. Christopher eventually realized that he would have to break into nearby cabins for food while the inhabitants were away. At first, he stole mostly from their gardens, hoping they would think it was a wild animal who had taken their vegetables. Christopher also had to deal with the harsh Maine wilderness. Realizing his tent would no longer suffice, one night he slept in an empty cabin. But he was too afraid the owners would return to find him, and so he decided to sleep outdoors from that point forward, no matter how bad the weather. Christopher did eventually find an area to stay. It was so off the beaten path that he knew no one would ever just stumble upon him. And soon, he began to fully embrace the life of isolation he made for himself. After creating a structure to live in, Christopher did his best to keep quiet for fear that someone would hear him. All the while, it was common for him to break into surrounding cabins to steal what food and drinks he could. Over time, Christopher became a skilled and stealthy thief. Even alarm systems were no match for the man who used to install them for a living. But he would only dare to enter a home when he was 100% certain no one was around. Sometimes he would also take spare keys so he could get in easier the next time. And Christopher was always sure to only take what he needed. After all, any obvious moves would give him away. He mostly selected snack cakes, bars of chocolate, and sodas. This way, he could keep himself from losing too much weight and succumbing to the elements. Eating wasn't Christopher's only concern. He also had to maintain his shelter. So he stole tarps, blankets, and coats whenever he could. He also took magazines, not only to read, but so that he could rip out the pages, lay them on the floor, and soak up any possible moisture. But Christopher was sure to leave as little evidence as possible that anyone had broken into a home. Though he didn't smash windows, he often removed doors, only to reinstall and repair them once he had all the supplies he needed. This way of life continued for nearly 3 decades. But over time, no matter how precise Christopher tried to be, folks began to notice things missing from their homes. They also saw the damage the mystery man had done. Christopher carried on, though, and he began to even break into homes at night. Residents of North Pond, Maine, would often report having heard strange noises around their properties during the evenings. At the same time, they could never spot an actual intruder. Though they just go back to sleep, these people woke up to find random things gone from their homes. Books, magazines, pants, boots, radios, batteries, and junk food were all taken, and reports about the break-ins were given to the police. Finally, cops started trying to find whoever was breaking into the homes. And it wasn't long before people began giving the culprit various monikers. They included not only the North Pond Hermit, but Maine's Loch Ness Monster and the Stealthy Yeti. Soon, folks in North Pond were installing surveillance cameras in their homes. Yet no matter what, Christopher could seemingly break in and get away with it over and over. Without anyone to pin the crime on, police filed a report where they referred to Christopher as the North Pond Hermit. Police caught their first big break when Christopher decided to enter the pine tree camp. It was an obvious choice, as it was stocked with all the tools and food anyone would need to survive in the wilderness. There was also a low chance that someone would notice items missing. But what Christopher didn't know was that police were hot on his trail. The facility was managed by Sergeant Terry Hughes, who had a plan to catch the North Pond Hermit. He installed industrial-grade floodlights, military-grade motion sensors in the kitchen, and lots of food. Then, when alarms started going off on April 4, 2013, Sergeant Hughes leapt into action. He arrived in the kitchen, fully expecting a burglar with weapons. He was shocked to find a seemingly normal middle-aged man. When Sergeant Hughes demanded the criminal get on the ground, he immediately complied. But as he got down, candy fell to the floor from his backpack. The man had no identification and didn't want to answer any questions. Eventually, after 2 hours of being interviewed, Christopher began to open up. And the investigators were shocked to learn that he had been living in isolation for 27 years. The level of discipline he showed while he broke into houses is beyond what most of us could remotely imagine, Sergeant Hughes said, according to the New York Post. And Christopher admitted that in his 27 years living in isolation, he only interacted with one person, a hiker making their way through the Maine wilderness. What did he say? Simply hi. Then, on October 28, 2013, Christopher pleaded guilty at Kennebec County Superior Court to 13 charges of burglary and theft. What shocked people the most was that for his crimes, which were estimated to be upwards of 1,000 break-ins, he only received a 7-month jail sentence. In addition, Christopher was handed 3 years of probation. He also had to meet with a judge every Monday, pay each of his victims $1,500 in restitution, and take part in a program for people with mental health issues. But while serving his jail sentence, Christopher made an effort to reconnect with his family that he abandoned without so much as a goodbye all those years ago. And when he was finally released, his brother offered him a job. Of course, given Christopher's unique story, it was only a matter of time before someone wrote a book about it. And that's just what Michael Finkel, an American journalist, did. In 2017, he published The Stranger in the Woods, having interviewed Christopher while he was still incarcerated. Meanwhile, Christopher confessed that, at the end of his journey, he had all but lost who he was. Solitude increased my perception. But here's the tricky thing. When I applied my increased perception to myself, I lost my identity. There was no audience, no one to perform for. There was no need to define myself. I became irrelevant, he explained. Please feel free to share with your friends.